The Buffalo Bills traded back and then ultimately out of the first round of the 2024 NFL Draft. I'll share my thoughts on what they did and didn't do on Thursday night today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, folks, welcome in. I know that there's a lot of people very excited about the Buffalo Bills and what they did in the first round of the 2024 NFL Draft. There's a lot of people that are confused about what they did, and there's a lot of people that are angry about what they did. And so my objective today is to share how I feel about what happened. And as I always say with the NFL Draft, nobody is right or wrong today, tomorrow, next week, in 2 months, or in a year, right? It takes time for these things to play out to see who was ultimately right. But Brandon Beane, the Buffalo Bills general manager, made the choice to trade back from pick 28 to 32 with the Kansas City Chiefs, and then from 32 to 33. So they traded completely out of the first round. I don't have a first round pick to discuss with you today. The Bills didn't make one. So what we're going to do is talk about what they didn't do, because I feel like that's where a lot of the focus and the conversation is right now. Then I want to get into the trades that they did make, and then I want to talk about what they can still do in this draft. First up, what they didn't do. And I think there's three major things to be mindful of. They didn't trade up for a wide receiver. They didn't pick a wide receiver. And then they didn't pick a wide receiver again and ultimately traded out of the first round. We'll start with the first one. The Bills did not move up for a receiver. And I know that whether it was moving all the way up and moving heaven and earth to get into the top 10 for one of these big three receivers, or maybe a more modest move up for a Brian Thomas, who ultimately went pick 23, if I'm not mistaken, to the Jacksonville Jaguars, Brandon Beane didn't do either of those things. And in his press conference, he said, we did not try to trade up. And he very clearly said, we never looked at going into the top 10. That was complete smoke. That was never within what he was willing to do. So that's step one, right? There was a lot of people that were hopeful to have this massive swing to go get a wide receiver. Obviously, that didn't make sense to Brandon Beane to get to the top 10. It didn't make sense to me either. To go part with multiple first-round picks, multiple second-round picks to go get one player, a receiver, never made sense to me. I'm glad it never made sense to Brandon Beane. He also didn't move up for Brian Thomas. And if you've listened to my conversations with you throughout the course of this draft season discussing Brian Thomas, you know that I wasn't overly enamored with him. Certainly gives you size and speed down the field and ball tracking ability, but a player that's very incomplete. Still has a lot to prove as a short and intermediate area route runner. A lot to prove in terms of his ability with yards after catch. Just a very incomplete player. I'm fine. I'm going to go to sleep here eventually and be completely okay that the Bills didn't trade up for Brian Thomas. I didn't have a first-round grade on him. So, of course, I'm totally fine not only not picking him, but not trading up for him. The other thing that they didn't do, or I guess they did, they traded back and allowed Kansas City to come up and draft Xavier Worthy. So much to unpack here. We'll start with Xavier Worthy because the Bills didn't pick him. If they wanted to, they could have picked Xavier Worthy. They didn't do it. And if you listen to my conversations on this podcast, I'm completely fine with that. I don't have a first-round grade on Xavier Worthy. He's got unbelievable speed. There's no question. The fastest 40-yard dash in the history of the NFL scouting combine. But there's zero, and I mean absolutely zero correlation to wide receiver production in the NFL and elite 40-yard dash times. Literally none. I think there's been one 1,000-yard receiving season in the history of the NFL by a wide receiver that ran in the 4.2s at the combine, and it was like Santana Moss. So there's no correlation. Now, I do respect Xavier Worthy. I've talked about this. I think for a 5'11", 165-pound receiver, I thought he did a really good job of taking a lot of volume, over 100 targets every single year at Texas. I think that says a lot. And I think everyone's kind of naturally thinking, oh my God, he plays for the Kansas City Chiefs. And Patrick Mahomes now has Xavier Worthy, and the Bills were the team that gave up the pick that allowed that to happen. I don't get the outrage over this. You didn't enable or empower the Chiefs to get Xavier Worthy. Because obviously if the Bills sat there and picked a player at 28, it wasn't going to be Xavier Worthy. They told you they didn't want to draft him because if they wanted to, they would have done it at 28. And there's this massive assumption that Kansas City wouldn't have gotten him otherwise. I don't understand that. They certainly were calling teams to get in position to draft Xavier Worthy. If the Bills sat there and picked a player at 28 and then the Chiefs moved up and got Xavier Worthy, what are we doing? So, yeah, I think there's this natural tendency that the Chiefs have won all the Super Bowls, 3 of the last 5, the last 2. They haven't had a down-the-field receiving threat since Tyreek Hill left. And now all of a sudden the Bills made the trade that allowed them to get Xavier Worthy. The Bills had to make the moves that they were most comfortable with for themselves. If they wanted Xavier Worthy, they could have picked him. They didn't. They told you that they didn't want him. And so the Bills somehow having this burden of enabling Kansas City to get Xavier Worthy is massively assuming. Massively assuming. The Bills' first responsibility is the Bills. And I talked for weeks about my preferred option is to trade back. I wasn't in love with these wide receivers. I was never in love with these wide receivers to pick at 28. There's receivers that now the Bills are in the second round. I think there's a lot more appropriate value to be had. We'll get to that. But the opportunity cost, I'm completely comfortable with because I didn't value Brian Thomas in the first round. I didn't value Xavier Worthy in the first round. The other thing that they did was they moved back to 32, and then they trade back to 33. The Carolina Panthers come up, and they get Xavier Legette. If there's a level of disappointment that I have in what Brandon Beane did, it's not that they didn't trade up for one of the top 3. It's not that they didn't trade up for Brian Thomas. It's not that they didn't draft Xavier Worthy and traded the picks that enabled Kansas City to get him. It's that I would have picked Xavier Legette. You've heard me rave about what I think he is as a player and the physical mismatch, the size, the physicality, the athleticism, the underrated route running ability. Like I would have 100% picked him at 32. But once again, Brandon Beane told you that he didn't want to do that. Because if he wanted to pick Xavier Legette, he could have done it at 32. Instead, Dan Morgan, his former cohort in the Bills front office, comes up and gets Xavier Legette. If I have a level of disappointment, it's that. But I'm also very comfortable, with the other opportunities that Brandon Beane has to get wide receiver talent. So that's to me where the biggest disappointment would be from tonight. I want to get into the trades. I want to talk about the other opportunities that exist for Brandon Beane in this draft. All of that's coming up here in just a moment, so be sure to stick with me. When you're looking to hire for your small business, you want to find as many quality professionals that you can that are right for the role, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else who aren't even necessarily actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats right now and might not have the time or resources to hire. Well, LinkedIn is always consistently looking for ways to make that process easier. In fact, they just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode of your favorite Locked On podcast is brought to you by the best meal kit service in the game, Home Chef. No more having to answer the dreaded question, what are we going to do for dinner tonight? Thanks to Home Chef and their chef-designed recipes that are delivered directly to my door, all pre-packaged, pre-portioned. They even peel the garlic cloves for you. And each recipe, one of my favorites, blackened mahi, comes with a full page of easy-to-read instructions that include customization options and pictures to guide you along the way through the step-by-step process so you don't have to ask, is that what chard looks like? I cannot recommend Home Chef enough, especially right now, because for a limited time, Home Chef is giving Locked On listeners 18 free meals, free dessert for life, and of course, free shipping on your first box if you head to homechef.com/lockedon today. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 18 free meals and free dessert for life. Yes, you heard that right. Homechef.com/lockedon. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert.
All right, folks. So the Buffalo Bills made a couple of trades. So let's get into those trades before we start diving into what the Bills can get done with the draft picks that remain and the opportunities that remain. So the Bills had two different trades, and I think it's good to look at the combined trade haul. So the Bills ultimately move back 5 spots. They go from 28 to 33. They move up in the 4th round. They move up from their 6th round pick. So they send 28. They move up 38 spots with they send away a pick. They send 133. They get 95, right? So they move up 38 spots. Then they turn a 6 into a 5. So they turn a 4 into a 3 and a 6 into a 5. That 6 into a 5 is a 59 spot jump. It's a pretty big jump. So they send away pick 28, 133, 200, and 248. And they gain 33, 95, 141, and 221. So you move back 5 spots. You turn a 4 into a 3, a 6 into a 5, and you position yourself a lot better through the middle rounds. Now, I know that the Bills didn't make a 1st-round pick. So you're like, Joe, that's great. Excited to have pick 95 and a little higher in the 6 to the 5. Like, I get it. But we don't have a 1st-round pick. Well, I have good news for you. There's other ways to get good players outside of the 1st round. Look at the NFL. It's littered with very good players that weren't picked in the 1st round. Look at the Buffalo Bills. James Cook, Osiris Torrance, Spencer Brown, Khalil Shakir, Deion Dawkins, Matt Milano, Terrel Bernard, Christian Benford, Rasul Douglas. Like, there's player after player that wasn't a 1st-round pick that's a meaningful guy. And my whole point that I've been making in the status of this team right now is that they're very clearly amid a roster reset. And there's a lot of good cases to be made for giving yourself as many opportunities as possible to get hits in the draft. And now the Bills don't have a net higher amount of picks at the end of this, but they're picking significantly higher for the sacrifice of moving back 5 spots ultimately. Again, you move back 5 spots, 28 to 33, and you turn 133 into 95, and you turned 200 into 141. And if you want to get into it, they turned 248 into 221. So just better positioning all the way around. The Bills now have 3 picks on day 2. Previously, they had 1. And I know that that also means that they didn't have a first-round pick, but they are picking 33. So, no, they didn't pick a pick in the first round, but clearly they just didn't have any players that were worth it. The draft is about value. And you don't just pick a player to pick a player. You have to have the appropriate value. I think they're very clearly telling you how they followed their draft board and allowed that to inform their decisions. Again, I think there's this expectation that some massive, big-time wide receiver was coming to the Bills on Thursday night. I think there's very comparable prospects that they can get still. Again, I didn't have first-round pick on Brian Thomas, Xavier Worthy. I did have one on Xavier Legette. I've already declared that. That's where my level of disappointment comes. So now the Bills in this draft entering Friday night, they have picks 33, 60, 95, 128, 141, 144, 160, 163, 204, and 221. They could trade back again from 33. But what I really get excited about is you look at pick 60, 95, 128, you have a lot of ammunition to move up. And if you listen to our conversation earlier this week about where the sweet spot of this draft is, I said it was the second and third rounds. It wasn't the late first round. It's the second and third rounds. And Brandon Beane is well positioned to take advantage of where the best value in this draft lies. So I think he's doing well to allow the work that they did before the draft and what happened during the draft to position themselves to take best advantage of where it makes the most sense in this draft. That's just how I see it. And I can say that because I've done the work. I've evaluated this class. I've graded these players. And so I think that puts me in position to that where I've earned the right to be able to tell you this makes sense to me. If you didn't evaluate this class and all that you thought to yourself was get a wide receiver in the first round, yeah, you're disappointed. But you have a very incomplete perspective on what this is. One of the talking points that I'm seeing is that the Bills moved from 32 to 33, and they got like a 5th round pick, and they sacrificed a 5th-year option on a player. And this isn't something that I'm saying today because the Bills traded out of the first round. There's plenty of me. I've said this on podcasts. I've said this to people who've asked me questions in subtext and other different forms. The 5th-year option really only matters when it comes to like quarterbacks. It's not that big of a deal to not have a 5th-year option. Like, that's not a qualifier to me. I'm not going to trade. I'm not going to not trade from 32 to 33 because I want to have the 5th-year option. The 5th-year option allows you to have more team control. That's the benefit beyond the 4th year for a first-round pick. If the player's good, just extend them. Just give them a contract extension. Use the franchise tag if you have to. Ideally, and I'm not making this up, ideally, you actually never have a player play a down on the fifth-year option. Ideally, that would be the case because you take care of an extension. The fifth-year option is a hard number against your cap. It's not good. It allows you to have more time to make decisions, but if you don't know after 4 years if this is your player that you want to commit to long-term or not, I don't know what to tell you. So where I think the fifth-year option really helps teams is for quarterbacks and for teams that have situations where the player doesn't want to play for them anymore. That's not the Bills. So this isn't a big piece of this conversation for me, is sacrificing the fifth-year option. If he's your guy, extend him. If it gets really dicey, put the franchise tag on him, which is pretty close to what the fifth-year options are going to be. You don't want him playing on that hard number anyways. Because if you apply the fifth-year option, you say you drafted a receiver at 32 and you wanted to use the fifth-year option, that's a hard 20-something million against your cap, probably even higher now that these receiver contracts are going up. And the Bills are in a great spot at 33. This is one of the coveted spots in the draft because now everyone has the night and tomorrow all day to reset their boards and think about what they want to do. And the Bills have that first pick. And so if a team wants to come up for somebody, they have the opportunity to do that. If the Bills wanted to trade it for a veteran receiver, they now have the time to kind of look into that. And they can say, we can give you 33, and the other teams can look at what options are available to them and maybe you trade for a vet. Like the Bills are in a good spot. They're in that pole position going into night 2, and that's always a good spot. Typically you do see it traded in some way, shape, or form. And I'm excited to kind of see what goes down with the Bills now owning this selection. And that's going to be the focus of the next segment, where I talk about what the Bills can still do in this draft, the wide receivers that are available, et cetera, et cetera. So be sure to stick with me. Folks, I've been told I'm a competitive person. You think that's true? Well, of course it is. We all have a competitive side to us. And my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with my friends. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, and I can claim those riches. I can rob their vaults of riches for myself, and the leaderboard shows me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go for free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, folks. A lot of draft left. 6 of the 7 rounds still remain. And a lot of very good wide receivers remain. I had 19 receivers graded in the first 3 rounds. And 11 of them are still available. There's some attractive players. A.D. Mitchell is available. I would not have loved A.D. Mitchell at 28. I think there's some concerns with his consistency with effort. But his physical upside is undeniable. Height, weight, speed guy. Smooth athlete for a bigger guy. Body control. Amazing hands. Very common mock draft pick to the Bills at 28. If they just pick him at 33, you're going to have to backpedal quite a bit if you're mad, right? Because you got to let this thing play out. Ladd McConkey's there. I know he has a lot of fans. If he picked him at 28, nobody would have blinked an eye. Well, what if they just get him at 33? Jalen Polk out of Washington. Devontae Walker out of North Carolina. I think the Bills really do like Troy Franklin. Keon Coleman's there. Not a fan of Keon Coleman. He's there. There's other receivers the Bills can get. I'd anticipate them drafting a couple of wide receivers. And it's not just the remaining receivers that are available. There's veterans. The San Francisco 49ers, amid trade rumors involving both Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, drafted Ricky Pearsall with the 31st pick, wide receiver out of Florida. I know they're going to tell you they're not going to trade him. Their actions are saying that that's a possibility. They just picked the receiver in the first round. T. Higgins has made it clear that he'd like to be traded. I don't think the Bengals are going to trade him. I think they'd love to not trade him to the Bills. But you never know. Maybe Cortland Sutton with the Denver Broncos. You want to get real big brain? Justin Jefferson? I don't know. Right now, the Minnesota Vikings have a first-round pick next year and 2 fifth-round picks. That's it. The Bills have plenty to offer there. I'm just saying, let it play out. Brandon Beane didn't trade away Stephon Diggs and trade out of the first round because he doesn't have any type of plan at wide receiver. So panic when it's appropriate to panic. And right now, on April 26th, it's not appropriate to panic. The Bills are not playing a game tomorrow, next week, or in 2 months, or in 3 months. His job is to have the roster ready to go in September. A lot is going to happen. Again, the draft is over 250 picks. There's been 32 of them. And with every move, it changes the dynamics of rosters. There's pathways for other teams to draft receivers, and then other veteran receivers becomes available. There's just more opportunity out there. The Giants just drafted Malik Neighbors. Maybe Darius Slayton is available. There are opportunities. So let's let it play out a little bit. A lot still to come. The Bills can come away with a couple wide receivers. They're in position to get some defensive line help. Running back. Interior offensive line. Safety. Corner. There's plenty of opportunities to fill out this roster. But I want to leave you with this. And I did an episode, and I'm glad I did a couple weeks ago. I said, what if the Bills don't pick a wide receiver in the first round? And I said, that means one of two things happen. They picked a player at a different position, or they traded out of the first round. So I'm glad I did it. Go back and listen to it. I did it in advance of this thing happening because I thought it could happen. But the one thing that I want to bring up from that conversation is the Green Bay Packers. Everyone is buzzing about Jordan Love and all of his young weapons. And I think that the Green Bay Packers have the best combination of depth, talent, and youth at the wide receiver position in the NFL. The best combination of depth, youth, and talent at the wide receiver position in the NFL. Drayden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks. Watson and Doubs were picked in 2022. Watson was picked 34. Doubs was picked 132. Reed and Wicks were picked in 2023. Reed was picked 50. Wicks was picked 159. So 2 2s, a 4, and a 5. That right now is the best combination of youth, depth, and talent in the NFL wide receiver. 2 2s, a 4, and a 5. And that quartet of wide receivers in their rookie season for 2 of them and their second season for the other 2, in Jordan Love's first season as a starter, had 2,470 receiving yards and 25 touchdowns last year. The Bills' top 4 wide receivers in 2023, keeping in mind Josh Allen, elite established NFL starting quarterback with established weapons in Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, they had 2,690 yards and 18 touchdowns. So 200 yards less, but 7 more touchdowns. No first-round picks. 2 2s, a 4, and a 5. Let's let it play out. Let's see what happens. Beane's going to draft some receivers. Beane might trade for a receiver. What you didn't get is a moment on Thursday night where it said with the 20 whatever pick in the first round, the Buffalo Bills select wide receiver, fill in the blanks. That's the one thing that didn't happen. It doesn't mean that not only can the Bills improve the wide receiver core, but all the other positions on the team that also matter in addition to wide receivers. I think if you've been listening to my podcasts throughout this draft season, you know that I've talked about my preferred option is trading back. And that's what happened. And the receipts are there. I'm not making this up because this is what happened, that I want to align with the team. You listen to this podcast, you know I can disagree with Brandon Beane and this team a ton. This isn't one of those times. And I know that people out there do disagree, and there are angry people and all of that. I respect everyone's viewpoint on this. This is how I see it. And thank you for hearing me out. We have a lot of content to do. The Bills have 10 picks, 3 on night 2, maybe some more trades, maybe a veteran. I'm covering it all for you on this podcast all weekend long. There's going to be plenty of episodes, so make sure that you're subscribed. We also have the live broadcast. We did, Kyle Krabs and I, we did night one, and it was awesome. Had a couple thousand people in there the whole time. We had fun. A lot of great comments in the chat. We're back again for you Friday night for the entirety of night two. So come join us on the Locked On NFL Scouting YouTube channel for night two as well, for our live reaction, breaking down every single pick. We had a lot of fun on Thursday night, even more to cover on Friday night. So as always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills! And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.